Imagine a quiet, starry night, where the only sounds are the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant hum of city life. Yet, inside one small, dilapidated house, a storm is brewing that will soon change everything. Ramon Suarez, a father crushed by poverty and desperation, faces an unimaginable decision, one that would shatter the very essence of his soul. For just $1,000, he sells his daughter Lucia to a ruthless drug lord, sealing her fate and spiraling into a world of guilt, regret, and fear. As the days pass, the weight of his choice bears down on Ramon, turning his once loving home into a prison of despair. But hope flickers in the most unlikely places. In the dark heart of danger, Lucia, despite being betrayed by her father, hatches a daring plan to save him and herself. Meanwhile, a brave detective named Hernandez infiltrates the drug lord's mansion, gathering evidence to bring down the criminal empire. When all seems lost, the tides turn in a final, nail-biting showdown. With bullets flying and lives hanging by a thread, Ramon and Lucia must fight for their survival and their chance at redemption. In a world where darkness threatens to consume them, can they find the light of forgiveness and escape the shadows of their past? If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. In the suffocating heat of a summer night, Ramon Suarez found himself at the edge of a decision that would forever scar his soul. Standing in the doorway of his daughter Lucia's modest room, he hesitated, the dim glow of the moon casting a ghostly light across her innocent face. Lucia, just 18 years old, lay peacefully unaware of the storm of betrayal brewing in her father's heart. The weight of Ramon's 45 years pressed down on him like an unbearable burden, every wrinkle on his weathered face a testament to the relentless struggles he had endured. His weary eyes wandered over the crumbling walls and the sagging ceiling of their home, each flaw a painful reminder of the crushing poverty that had them in its relentless grip. As he stood there, Ramon was haunted by a torrent of memories, each more painful than the last. He could still hear the anguished sobs of his wife, Elena, as she counted out the last few coins for medicine they couldn't afford. The menacing echoes of loan sharks pounding on their door in the dead of night still reverberated in his mind, a terrifying reminder of the noose tightening around their necks. And the image of his youngest son, Pedro, burning with fever, helpless and untreated, stabbed at his heart like a dagger, a constant reminder of his failure as a father. A sudden, jarring ring from his cell phone snapped Ramon out of his agonizing reverie. With trembling hands, he fumbled for the device, his heart thudding with a mix of fear and dread. The voice on the other end was as cold as the grave, issuing a chilling ultimatum: "You have 24 hours to pay, Suarez, or your family will pay with blood." The call ended abruptly, leaving a hollow silence that seemed to echo the finality of his impending doom. Ramon's gaze fell on Lucia once more, and the pain in his chest deepened into a gnawing ache. How had it come to this? How could he save his family from the jaws of despair? In the silence of the night, he dragged his weary feet to the kitchen, where a mountain of overdue bills and eviction notices awaited him. Among the scattered papers, he found a crumpled card with gilded letters that promised quick solutions for difficult problems. Ramon had held on to it for weeks, a desperate lifeline he had prayed he would never need. But desperation had finally driven him to this dark precipice. With a heart pounding like a drum of doom, he dialed the number, each ring amplifying the weight of the decision he was about to make. On the third ring, a deep, foreboding voice answered, "I have a proposal for you, Suarez, but the price is high." Ramon's eyes drifted to Lucia's room one last time, his soul screaming in silent agony. "I'll do whatever it takes," he whispered into the phone, his voice barely more than a breath, sealing the fate of his daughter and his family with those fateful words. At that moment, Ramon knew he had crossed a line from which there would be no return. The darkness swallowing any last remnants of his already shattered conscience. The opulent glow of La Rosa Dorada radiated like a beacon of indulgence amid the city's chaos, an island of extravagance that felt like a different world. Ramon Suarez, with his threadbare shirt and scuffed shoes, looked like a lost soul who had stumbled into a place where he didn't belong. As he sat at the polished mahogany table, he couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of his inadequacy. Across from him, El Jaguar lounged with the casual grace of a predator, his suit impeccably tailored, his smile sharp and cold. He exuded an aura of power that made Ramon's skin crawl. $1,000, Suarez El Jaguar purred, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table, as if it were nothing. For your daughter Lucia. It's a generous offer, wouldn't you agree? Ramon felt the room tilt as the air seemed to rush from his lungs. His hands shook violently as he peeled open the envelope, revealing neat stacks of crisp bills, more money than he'd ever seen in his life. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to dream a life without debts, his family safe and secure. But that moment was shattered by the brutal reality of what was being asked of him. The thought of Lucia, his precious daughter, struck him like a physical blow, and he recoiled, pushing the envelope away with a trembling hand. No, I can't, he choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. She's my daughter, for God's sake. El Jaguar's smile never wavered, but something in his eyes darkened, turning them cold as ice. With a slow, almost bored movement, he retrieved his phone and swiped through a series of photos. One by one, he showed them to Ramon. Elena stepping out of the supermarket, Pedro laughing in the park, and Lucia standing at the school gate, unaware that her every move was being tracked. Your family is under my protection now, Suarez El Jaguar murmured, his voice smooth but laced with venom. Take the deal, and all your troubles disappear. But if you refuse, well, let's just say it won't end well. Ramon's mind whirled in a vortex of guilt, terror, and despair. The walls of the elegant restaurant seemed to close in on him, suffocating him with the enormity of his predicament. He could feel the noose tightening around his neck, but it was the faces of his loved ones that truly tore at his soul. Sensing Ramon's inner turmoil, El Jaguar leaned in, his smile widening as he pulled out another thick stack of bills, placing it in front of Ramon with a sickening sense of finality. Consider this in advance, he said, his voice a dark caress, to show you that I'm a man of my word. Ramon's hand hovered over the money, his heart pounding like a drumbeat of doom. Each bill felt like a lead weight pressing down on his conscience, but the image of his family's safety loomed larger than anything else. His gaze met El Jaguar's, and at that moment Ramon knew he had crossed an irreversible line. His voice, when it came, was hoarse and broken. I accept, he whispered, the words tasting of ash in his mouth. El Jaguar's smile grew, a sinister curve of satisfaction. Welcome to the business, Suarez, he said softly, his tone dripping with triumph. Your daughter is mine now. The air inside the small Suarez home was thick with a tension that seemed ready to explode at any moment. Lucia, her dark eyes brimming with suspicion and a growing sense of dread, watched her father move about the cramped room, his every action marked by an uncharacteristic nervousness. Something had changed in him over the past few days, and Lucia's instincts screamed that it was something terrible. What's going on? Dad, she asked, her voice steady, though fear tightened her chest. You've been acting so strange. What are you hiding from me? Ramon couldn't meet her eyes, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the papers strewn across the table. Nothing, sweetheart, just grown-up stuff, he mumbled, trying to dismiss her concerns with a weak smile. But Lucia wasn't a child anymore, and she knew when something was wrong. Determined to uncover the truth, she made her way to her parents' room, her heart pounding with each step. Her fingers searched under the mattress, and there was a letter, the paper crinkling under her touch. Lucia, Ramon's voice rang out in panic as he burst into the room, but it was too late. She had already torn open the envelope, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of the money inside. Where did this come from? Dad, Lucia's voice wavered, the tremor of betrayal lacing her words. "What have you done?" Cornered and unable to hide any longer, Ramon crumbled, the truth spilling from his lips in a torrent of despair. He confessed everything: the desperate deal with El Jaguar, the fear that had driven him to such a dark decision. Lucia listened in stunned silence, her world unraveling with every word. "You sold me," she finally screamed, her voice breaking as hot tears streamed down her face. "Your daughter." "I had no choice," Ramon pleaded, his voice choked with desperation. "They were going to kill us all." But there was no reason with Lucia's fury. Years of sacrifice, buried resentment, and unspoken pain erupted between them. The argument escalated, each word cutting deeper than the last. In a surge of panic, Lucia turned to flee, but Ramon's hand shot out, grabbing her arm in a frantic attempt to stop her. "Let me go," she cried, struggling to break free from his grip. In the chaos, Lucia lost her balance, stumbling and hitting her head against the edge of the table. The sickening thud echoed through the room, followed by a thin trickle of blood that began to seep from the wound on her forehead. Ramon stared in horror, the weight of his actions crushing him as he realized what he had done. His hands shook uncontrollably as he reached for his phone, his mind numb with guilt and fear. "It's done," he whispered into the receiver, his voice hollow and defeated. "I accept the deal." Outside, the low hum of a black van's engine cut through the still night, its headlights casting eerie shadows across the front of the house. Lucia's fate was sealed, the future she had known snatched away by the very man who was supposed to protect her. The stillness of the night was shattered by the deafening roar of a powerful engine. A sleek, ominous black van pulled up in front of the Suarez house, its very presence exuding menace. The door creaked open, and out stepped El Jaguar, moving with the lethal grace of a predator on the prowl. Two hulking men followed him, their imposing figures casting long, intimidating shadows under the dim streetlights. Ramon opened the door, his face etched with the agony of a man who had surrendered to despair. On the couch, Lucia lay half-conscious, a crude bandage wrapped around her head, her spirit as broken as her body. "I see you've made it easier for me," Suarez El Jaguar said, his voice dripping with icy satisfaction as his eyes swept over the scene, taking in every detail with a calculating gaze. The neighborhood, once a place of mundane routines, had turned into a stage for a silent horror. Curious yet terrified, the neighbors cautiously peered out from behind their curtains, too afraid to intervene in what they instinctively knew was beyond their control. The aura of power that radiated from El Jaguar was suffocating, a dark cloud that hung over the street, ensuring that no one would dare to speak or act. With a simple nod, El Jaguar signaled his men to take Lucia. Ramon's heart screamed in protest, but his body remained frozen in fear as he watched his daughter being lifted like a rag doll and carried toward the van. Every fiber of his being wanted to stop them, to fight, to protect her, but the terror that gripped him was stronger than his paternal instinct. El Jaguar's cold eyes bore into Ramon as he handed over a heavy briefcase. $1,000, as we agreed, he said with a voice that was as emotionless as it was lethal. Ramon took the briefcase, its weight far greater than the sum of money it contained. Every bill inside was tainted, a painful reminder of the unthinkable betrayal he had committed. "Remember," Suarez El Jaguar warned, his voice lowering to a menacing growl. "She's mine now. If you talk, if you so much as think about crossing me, your family will suffer consequences far worse than you can imagine." With that, the van roared to life, carrying Lucia into the darkness, leaving Ramon standing in the middle of the street, a broken man clutching the price of his daughter's life. The eyes of the neighbors burned into him, a cocktail of pity, revulsion, and fear. Ramon felt their silent judgment like knives in his back. In the distance, the wail of police sirens pierced the night, indifferent to the tragedy that had just unfolded. Ramon looked down at his trembling hands, stained with the blood of his daughter and tainted by the dirty money that had sealed his fate. The realization hit him with crushing force. He hadn't just lost Lucia, he had forfeited his very soul. Overwhelmed, Ramon fell to his knees on the cold, unforgiving pavement, the briefcase slipping from his grasp. The world around him faded, reduced to the numbing sound of approaching sirens and the deafening silence of his despair. 2 months passed, but for Ramon Suarez, time had lost all meaning. Each day was a relentless cycle of torment, a living hell that only deepened with every passing hour. The money he had sold his daughter for had erased his financial debts, but the emotional debt he owed was insurmountable. His once warm home had become a cold, oppressive prison, the walls closing in on him with every pang of guilt and regret. Ramon, now a mere shadow of the man he once was, drifted through life in a daze. His hollow eyes, ringed by dark circles, were windows to a soul that had been hollowed out by sleepless nights and endless self-reproach. The bottle had become his only solace, a futile attempt to drown out the screaming voices of his conscience that haunted him day and night. Elena, his wife, regarded him with a mixture of contempt and sorrow, her heart shattered by the loss of their daughter and the man she had once loved. "Where is my daughter, Ramon?" she demanded every day, her voice laced with accusation, her eyes searching his for answers that never came. "What did you do to our Lucia?" But Ramon had no words to offer, no explanations, only the silence of a man who had lost everything and the burning sting of alcohol that did nothing to numb the unbearable pain. Every time Ramon shut his eyes, the darkness would engulf him, dragging him into the merciless grip of his nightmares. In those twisted visions, Lucia's voice echoed, a desperate cry for help that pierced through his soul. Her pleas haunted him, but his feet felt like lead, dragging him further away, while the weight of blood money tainted his hands. The guilt gnawed at him like a relentless predator, until one fateful night, drowning in alcohol and despair, Ramon made a decision that he hoped might bring him salvation. His steps were unsteady as he stumbled into the cold, unforgiving night, his destination clear the police station. There he would lay bare his sins, confess to everything, and perhaps, just perhaps, find a way to save Lucia and reclaim a shred of his lost humanity. But as he navigated the shadowed streets, his mind a turbulent storm of regret and self-loathing, Ramon remained oblivious to the ominous van creeping behind him. The vehicle's presence went unnoticed until it screeched to a halt beside him, snapping him back to the grim reality. A chill ran down his spine as 2 hulking figures emerged, their faces unmistakable. They were the same men who had ripped Lucia from his life, dragging her into a world of darkness. Fear and recognition surged through Ramon, but before he could react, they closed in on him, their intentions as clear as the moonless sky above. Suddenly, out of the looming shadows, Lucia appeared, her eyes filled with a desperate urgency. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling as she ensured they were alone. "You have to leave now." Ramon's confusion deepened, a mixture of fear and disbelief washing over him. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "El Jaguar has ordered me to kill you," Lucia's words spilled out, each one slicing through her like a blade. The horror in Ramon's eyes was unmistakable, but what followed was worse, the look of resignation that settled over his features, breaking Lucia's heart in ways she hadn't thought possible. "Maybe this is what I deserve," Ramon murmured, his voice heavy with sorrow and acceptance, each word a dagger to Lucia's already shattered soul. No, Lucia's voice rang out, stronger and more resolute than she had ever imagined. The fierceness surprised even her as she continued, "I've prepared a plan. You must listen carefully." Meanwhile, deep within the labyrinth of El Jaguar's fortress, Detective Hernandez, disguised as one of the mansion's maintenance workers, moved with the stealth of a shadow. His eyes were sharp, his mind focused on gathering the crucial evidence that could finally bring down the cartel's merciless empire. In a dimly lit corridor, he stumbled upon a scene that churned his stomach, a brutal display of El Jaguar's wrath against one of his men. The sickening violence left Hernandez momentarily frozen, but it also provided him with the final piece of the puzzle he had been meticulously assembling. As nightfall descended upon the mansion, cloaking it in an oppressive darkness, two parallel fates began to unfold. Lucia, driven by desperation and the fierce determination to save her father, set her dangerous plan into motion. In the shadowed basement, she worked quickly, arranging a grim tableau, splatters of blood, discarded bullet casings, and a bundle carefully wrapped in a blood-soaked sheet designed to resemble a lifeless body. Ramon, concealed within the confines of a nearby closet, could feel his heart pounding against his ribcage. The silence was deafening. Each creak of the floorboards and every faint whisper in the distance seemed like a herald of their imminent doom. Suddenly, the air grew heavy as El Jaguar made his entrance, his malevolent aura spreading through the room like a toxic cloud. His gaze, sharp and calculating, swept over the scene before him, searching for any flaw, any hint of treachery. "It's done," Lucia declared, her voice betraying none of the anxiety that tightened her chest. Despite the trembling in her hands, she maintained a facade of cold composure. El Jaguar's approach was slow and deliberate. He reached out, his fingers grazing the bloodied sheet that shrouded the false corpse. Time seemed to stretch into an unbearable eternity as Lucia held her breath, waiting for the moment he would see through the ruse. But instead of the inevitable confrontation, a smile, a sinister, twisted smile curled on El Jaguar's lips. "Well done, my little viper," he purred, the words dripping with dark satisfaction. "You've proven your loyalty." For Lucia, the words were both a relief and a chilling reminder of the dangerous game she was playing. While El Jaguar seemed convinced, the real challenge had only just begun. In the shadows, Hernandez prepared to make his move, the weight of justice heavy on his shoulders. Meanwhile, Lucia steeled herself for the battle still ahead, knowing that the night was far from over, and the true test of their courage and cunning was yet to come. Just as they believed their plan had succeeded, a muffled noise suddenly emerged from the closet where Ramon was concealed. El Jaguar's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes narrowing into slits of suspicion. "What was that?" he growled, his voice thick with menace. Panic surged through Lucia like a tidal wave. Without thinking, she made a desperate decision. With swift precision, she pressed a hidden shard of glass into her palm, slicing through the flesh. "Ouch!" she yelped, her voice laced with pain. The sharp cry echoed through the basement, drawing El Jaguar's attention like a magnet. "I cut myself on something on the floor." For a brief, precious moment, the drug lord's focus shifted away from the closet and onto Lucia. His dark eyes flickered with irritation, but also something more, perhaps a hint of twisted concern or curiosity. Seeing her chance, Lucia steeled herself and led him out of the basement, away from Ramon's precarious hiding spot. Each step was a silent prayer that her father would remain undetected. Once they were alone in the dimly lit hallway, El Jaguar's gaze fell on Lucia's bleeding hand. Without warning, he grasped it, his fingers digging into her flesh. His eyes gleamed with a disturbing mix of cruelty and something far more dangerous desire. "You're strong, my girl," he whispered, his voice a venomous blend of admiration and threat. "Maybe too strong for your good." A shiver of dread coursed through Lucia, her skin crawling under his touch. She had managed to save her father this time, but at what cost? The unspoken understanding between them was suffocating. She had traded a piece of her soul to protect Ramon, and the weight of that sacrifice pressed heavily on her heart. Meanwhile, in the cramped darkness of the closet, Ramon fought to keep his emotions in check. Tears welled in his eyes, a turbulent mix of relief and anguish. The reality of what his daughter had become, the lengths she had gone to, cut deeper than any blade. The knowledge that her innocence had been sacrificed for his survival filled him with sorrow so profound it nearly crushed him. In the shadows, Detective Hernandez observed everything, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Every interaction, every murmur of dialogue was meticulously recorded in his mind, building the case that would, hopefully, dismantle El Jaguar's empire. The tension in the mansion was so thick it could be sliced with a knife, every movement charged with the potential for violence. Suddenly, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder as they approached the mansion. Hernandez's heart skipped a beat as he glanced out a nearby window, his face paling with realization. "They weren't found," he muttered under his breath, a mix of dread and urgency twisting in his gut. The operation was unraveling faster than he anticipated, and the safety of everyone involved was hanging by a thread. The night was far from over, and the final act was about to begin, where the thin line between survival and destruction would be drawn in blood. Lucia sprang to her feet, her body coiled with tension, ready to act. "How do you know?" she demanded, her voice edged with urgency. "I don't know for sure," Hernandez admitted, pulling out his weapon with grim determination. "But we can't afford to stay here any longer. We have to leave now." As the reality of their situation sank in, Lucia and Ramon exchanged a glance, a silent communication of fear, determination, and a shared resolve. This might be their last shot at freedom, their final opportunity to redeem themselves and leave behind the shadows that had led them for so long. The wail of approaching sirens filled the air, growing louder and more ominous with each passing second. Father and daughter steeled themselves for the coming storm, united in their determination to face whatever lay ahead. Chaos erupted as they burst into the streets, the once quiet night now alive with the sounds of screeching tires, blaring sirens, and frantic shouts. Hernandez led the way, weaving through the labyrinthine alleys that snaked through the city, avoiding the main roads where El Jaguar's men and their allies within the corrupt police force were hunting them like prey. "This way," Hernandez gasped, his breath ragged as he pointed to a nondescript back door of an old, crumbling warehouse. They rushed inside, the cold, stale air of the abandoned building enveloping them as the distant crackle of gunfire reverberated through the night. Lucia's heart pounded in her chest, every nerve in her body on edge, ready for the fight or flight that could come at any moment. "We have to split up," Lucia declared, her voice ice cold, the survival instinct in her taking over. "Sticking together makes us an easy target." Ramon's face twisted with horror at the thought. "No, Lucia, I can't lose you again. I won't." "Your daughter's right," Hernandez interjected, his tone firm and unwavering. "I have a contact at the port who can get you out of the city, but you'll need to move fast." Lucia's mind raced, already calculating their next steps. She nodded, determination etched into her every feature. "I'll go first. Make sure the path is clear." Before Ramon could voice his objections, Lucia had already made her move. She slipped through a broken window, her silhouette quickly swallowed by the darkness outside. Left behind, Hernandez and Ramon waited in a tense, suffocating silence, every second stretching into an eternity. The uncertainty gnawed at them, each moment heavy with the dread of what might happen next. Suddenly, the crackling of Hernandez's walkie-talkie broke the stillness, a harsh, jarring sound that sent a jolt through both men. The message that would come through could mean life or death, hope or despair. As Hernandez lifted the device to his ear, Ramon's thoughts were consumed with a single prayer that Lucia would survive this night, and they might have a chance to find a new beginning, far from the darkness that had consumed them for so long. "Lucia," he shouted, dodging bullets and punches. Lucia, still dazed from the blow, struggled to stand, her eyes meeting her father's, a spark of hope ignited amid the chaos. Meanwhile, Hernandez was facing off against the Jaguar. The detective, despite his training, was overwhelmed by the brutality of the drug lord. "You should have stayed at your desk," Cop the Jaguar sneered, cornering Hernandez against a wall. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police reinforcements were approaching. The Jaguar cursed, realizing his advantage was slipping away. "We're leaving," he ordered his men. In the confusion of the retreat, Lucia saw her chance. With a quick movement, she picked up a fallen weapon and aimed at the Jaguar. "This is for everything you made me go through," she murmured, her finger on the trigger. But before she could fire, Ramon stopped her. "No, daughter, don't become what he wanted you to be." The Jaguar seized the moment to escape, disappearing into the night with his men. Seconds later, the police stormed the warehouse. Hernandez, injured but alive, quickly identified himself. "They're under my protection," he said, pointing to Lucia and Ramon. "They're key witnesses." As paramedics tended to the wounded, Lucia and Ramon embraced, silent tears running down their cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Lucia whispered. "For everything." Ramon hugged her tighter. "No, my girl, I'm the one who should be apologizing. But I promise you, from now on, I'll do everything I can to protect you." "Lucia," Ramon shouted, his voice rising above the chaos as he dodged bullets and punches, desperate to reach his daughter. Lucia, still reeling from the blow that had sent her to the ground, struggled to regain her footing. Her vision swam, but when her eyes met her father's, a flicker of hope ignited within her, a small but powerful beacon amid the turmoil. Across the warehouse, Hernandez was locked in a vicious struggle with El Jaguar. Despite the detective's rigorous training, he was no match for the sheer brutality of the drug lord. Every move Hernandez made was met with a counter that pushed him further into a corner. "You should have stayed behind your desk," Cop El Jaguar sneered, his voice dripping with malice, as he backed Hernandez against a cold, unforgiving wall. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night air, growing louder with each passing second. Reinforcements were closing in, and the realization struck El Jaguar hard. His sneer faltered, replaced by a snarl of frustration. "We're leaving," he barked to his men, knowing his grip on the situation was slipping away. The command sparked a chaotic retreat, his men scrambling to obey. In the confusion, Lucia saw her opportunity. Her gaze fell on a fallen weapon nearby, and with a swift, determined motion, she scooped it up and aimed it directly at El Jaguar. The memories of all the pain, fear, and suffering he had caused her surged through her, fueling her resolve. "This is for everything you made me go through," she murmured, her voice low and steady as her finger tightened on the trigger. But before she could fire, Ramon was there, his hand gently but firmly stopping her. "No, daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't become what he wanted you to be." Lucia froze, her father's words cutting through the haze of anger and revenge. In that moment of hesitation, El Jaguar seized the chance to escape, slipping into the shadows with his remaining men, disappearing into the night as the police stormed the warehouse, their presence now overwhelming. Hernandez, battered and bleeding but alive, quickly identified himself to the arriving officers. "They're under my protection," he stated firmly, pointing to Lucia and Ramon. "They're key witnesses. Make sure they're safe." As the paramedics began tending to the wounded, the adrenaline slowly ebbed away, leaving Lucia and Ramon standing amidst the aftermath. They turned to each other, and in a silent, shared moment of relief and sorrow, they embraced. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on them, and silent tears began to streak down their cheeks, mingling with the dust and blood. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Lucia whispered, her voice breaking as she clung to him. "For everything." Ramon held her tighter, his tears flowing freely. "It's okay, Lucia," he murmured. "We're still here. That's what matters. We're going to get through this together." In that embrace, surrounded by the remnants of chaos, there was a fragile, yet undeniable sense of hope. The road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but they had survived the worst of the storm. Now they would face whatever came next side by side, ready to reclaim the life that had been stolen from them. Ramon held Lucia even tighter, his voice heavy with guilt and resolve. "No, my girl, it's me who should be apologizing. I failed you in so many ways, but I swear, from now on, I'll do everything in my power to protect you." As they clung to each other, Hernandez approached, his expression a blend of relief and deep-seated worry. "We're not out of danger yet," he said, his voice low and serious. "The jaguar is still out there, and he won't stop until he's silenced us all." Lucia nodded, her determination hardening like steel. "Then we'll have to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than him." Together, the three of them exited the warehouse, stepping into the uncertain future that lay ahead. The night had been harrowing, but they knew the real battle was only beginning. By dawn, Lucia, Ramon, and Hernandez had taken refuge in a safe house on the outskirts of the city. The place was stark and cold, a temporary sanctuary from the storm that continued to rage beyond its walls. Exhaustion etched deep lines into Hernandez's face, but his eyes burned with unyielding determination as he spread a large map across the worn kitchen table. "The jaguar has activated all his networks," Hernandez explained, jabbing a finger at several key locations on the map. "He's got eyes and ears everywhere in the police force, the government, even the media. We're up against an entire machine." Lucia, cradling a cup of cold coffee, stared at the map, her mind racing. "He won't stop until he's erased us. We're the only real threat left to his empire, and he knows it." Ramon sat quietly in a corner, his gaze fixed on his daughter. The pride he felt in her strength was tainted by a deep, gnawing fear. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice tinged with despair. "We're just three people against an entire army." Lucia looked up, her eyes gleaming with a fierce resolve. "We have something they don't," she said, her voice firm. "Inside knowledge. I know how the jaguar operates. I know his weaknesses, his fears." Hernandez eyed her with interest. "So, what's your plan?" Lucia leaned over the map, her mind already formulating a strategy. "We set a trap," she said, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "We'll exploit his paranoia, make him doubt everything and everyone around him. We'll turn his empire against him." As they delved deeper into their plan, the television in the corner droned on, the local news providing a constant background noise. Suddenly, the broadcast shifted, and El Jaguar's face filled the screen, his eyes cold and calculating. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the TV. Lucia felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the man who had caused so much pain and suffering. His expression was one of confidence, but Lucia could see something else. There's something darker, more dangerous. "He's making his move," Hernandez muttered, his jaw tightening. Lucia's resolve only hardened. "Then so will we," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear curling in her gut. "This ends now. We'll bring him down, no matter what it takes." As the dawn light filtered through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the room, the three of them knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger. But there was no turning back. The real battle was just beginning, and they would face it together, whatever the cost. "I am a victim of a conspiracy," El Jaguar declared, his voice dripping with false indignation. "I demand that my rights be respected." Lucia couldn't bear to hear another word. With a sharp, angry gesture, she switched off the TV. "He's playing his respectable businessman card again," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "We need to act fast before he can manipulate the narrative any further." The plan had already been carefully crafted, each piece moving into place like a deadly game of chess. Hernandez used his deep network of contacts to leak false information about a supposed betrayal within El Jaguar's inner circle. Lucia, drawing on her intimate knowledge of the drug lord's operations, helped create a scenario so convincing that even the most paranoid mind would fall for it. The aim was simple: to sow doubt, to make the Jaguar second-guess his people. Meanwhile, Ramon, burning with the desire to redeem himself, volunteered to be the bait. "No," Lucia said sharply, her protective instincts flaring. "It's too dangerous. I won't risk losing you." But Ramon's eyes were filled with a quiet, determined resolve. "It's my chance to make things right, daughter," he insisted, his voice firm but gentle. "Let me do this." Lucia stared at her father, seeing in him the man he once was before desperation and fear had driven him to make terrible choices. She saw the strength and courage he had lost but was now reclaiming. After a long moment, she nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. "All right," she conceded, "but on one condition: we do it together." Hernandez watched their exchange with a mixture of admiration and concern, fully aware that the coming hours would be the most dangerous of their lives. The trap was set, but El Jaguar was a cunning predator. One mistake could cost them everything. As nightfall draped the city in a shroud of darkness and uncertainty, Lucia and Ramon found themselves standing in the vast, echoing space of an old port warehouse, the stage for their final confrontation. Hernandez and his team of trusted agents remained hidden in the shadows, weapons ready, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lucia, dressed in the sleek, elegant style she had learned during her time under El Jaguar's tutelage, paced the dusty floor, her mind racing despite the calm exterior she projected. Ramon stood beside her, his hands trembling slightly, though his face remained a mask of determination. "Remember the plan," Lucia whispered, her voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. "When he arrives, let me do the talking." Ramon nodded, swallowing hard. "I trust you, daughter," he replied, though his voice betrayed the fear gnawing at his insides. The tension in the air thickened as the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the silence. Headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the interior of the warehouse as three black vehicles rolled to a stop at the entrance. BD-268, the doors opened in unison, and El Jaguar stepped out of the central car, his immaculate suit a sharp contrast to the decaying surroundings. His cold, calculating gaze swept over Lucia and Ramon, a predatory smile curling his lips. "My dear protégé," he said, his voice a mockery of warmth, "and the traitorous father. How touching." Lucia took a deliberate step forward, her every movement exuding confidence she had carefully cultivated, though inside, her nerves were stretched taut. "Let's end this, Jaguar," she declared, her voice steady. "You know why we're here." El Jaguar's laughter rang out, a sound that sent a chill down Ramon's spine. "You think you can negotiate with me after your betrayal?" he sneered, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "I have information," Lucia responded, her tone unwavering. "Information that could either destroy you or save you." For the briefest of moments, doubt flickered across El Jaguar's face, exactly what they had been waiting for. But before they could capitalize on it, the situation spiraled out of control. One of El Jaguar's men, jittery and on edge, fired his weapon into the air, the deafening report shattering the tense silence and plunging the scene into chaos. Hernandez and his team sprang into action, emerging from the shadows with weapons drawn, shouting orders as they moved to secure the area. The Jaguar, realizing he had walked into a trap, snarled in fury. In a split second, he pulled out his gun and aimed it directly at Lucia, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. Ramon, driven by a father's instinct to protect, didn't hesitate. With a desperate cry, he threw himself in front of his daughter, just as El Jaguar squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, a sound that seemed to freeze time. Ramon collapsed to the ground, blood rapidly spreading across his shirt. Dad, Lucia's scream tore through the chaotic sounds of battle, her voice filled with anguish and terror. Everything else faded away as she dropped to her knees beside her father, cradling him in her arms. The world around them seemed to blur, the sounds of gunfire and shouts distant and unimportant as they locked eyes. Ramon's breath was shallow, but he managed a weak smile. "I'm sorry, Lucia," he whispered, his voice filled with both pain and a strange, peaceful acceptance. "For everything." Lucia's tears fell freely, mingling with the blood on her father's shirt. "No, Dad," she choked out, her heart breaking. "You've redeemed yourself. You saved me. You saved us." As the battle raged on, with Hernandez and his team fighting to subdue El Jaguar's men, time seemed to stand still for father and daughter. In that fleeting, poignant moment, Ramon's sacrifice became a symbol of his redemption, a final selfless act that would forever change their lives. The Jaguar, realizing his defeat, managed to slip away in the chaos, disappearing into the night. But for Lucia and Ramon, the victory was in the bond. They had rediscovered a bond forged in pain, sacrifice, and ultimately love. As paramedics rushed to Ramon's side, Lucia held his hand tightly, whispering words of comfort and love, determined to face whatever the future held together, no matter how uncertain it might be. As we come to the end of this intense and emotional journey, we've witnessed the power of redemption, the strength of family bonds, and the courage it takes to stand up against overwhelming odds. Lucia and Ramon's story is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a chance to make things right and to protect the ones we love. Now, we want to hear from you. What have you learned from this story? Is there a lesson or a moment that resonated with you? Please take a moment to reflect and share in the comments below what is one thing you've learned that you'll bring into your own life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave your comment below and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories and powerful lessons. Your support helps us continue to bring you content that not only entertains but also challenges and inspires you to grow. Thank you for watching.